David, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dave. What is your last name?
It's Pietraszewski. It's not easy to
And
say.
and what's my last name again?
Pinsof.
Okay.
Although you late, I heard you. There's a rumor that you would like to go by Von Pinsof.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Ideally, if you could
Okay.
call me Von Pinsoff, that would be much appreciated. We have a wonderful episode today, and that episode involves actual evolutionary psychology by actual
Hmm.
evolutionary psychologists, which
Ooh,
is
I
our
think
tagline, in
there. Oh,
case you
I was gonna
forgot it.
say. I think there's a podcast with a tagline like that. So yeah, enjoy, and we'll see you in a few seconds. And
That's
then
fine.
let's see.
We'll be back in a few seconds after a brief musical interlude.
Exactly. Yes, 7 seconds.
All
Yeah. Okay. So, David, today we have Cristina Moya.
We do.
As
This was a
Christina, sorry, David. Christina goes by, I don't know if she still has this her signature in her email, but it's Christina without the H. So it's Cristina.
Okay, cool. Um,
I mean, it's a homonym, so you can't tell the difference. But
that's right. We're doing great so far.
yeah, it's Christina, not Christina, just for the
Yes.
record. Yeah.
And who is she?
Christina Moya is, I don't, well, she's Christina Moya. I don't understand the
Okay. Wow. We're
No,
like three
Christina Moya.
minutes in and we still haven't even
No. She's a professor
gotten
of
past
anthropology
Christina.
at UC Davis. And Christina is from the academic family of Rob Boyd and Pete Richardson. She was a graduate student at UCLA. And Christina is just an incredibly uh, I think to my mind, she's one of the most sort of well-rounded and just intensely fierce intellects in the evolutionary behavioral sciences. And I just love talking to Christina. She's so charitable and willing to argue in a very positive way. Um, and so I'm always happy to talk to Christina, and it makes my day and my month and my year when I get to see her. So it's been a while because we're all busy professors now, and so it was really good to talk to her on this episode. And she talks about ethnolinguistic boundaries.
Yep. We get into intergroup boundaries, intergroup essentialism, which we get into in the podcast. We even get
Oh
into
yeah.
some of the different branches of the evolutionary social sciences.
Mm.
And we go into some interesting tangents too. We talked about like coolness and charisma. Like it was a really fun,
Oh yeah.
wide-ranging
This is when we also
conversation.
talked about
Ah,
flat
that's
Earth
right. Yeah.
conspiracies and
Yeah. A lot of flat
conspiracies
earthism
in
in this one.
general. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you're interested in flat Earth things, this is the one for you.
Yep. All right.
So, without further ado, I love this one. This is a great episode. Without further ado, here is Christina Moya and David and I talking about flat Earth and everything related. And enjoy. Okay, we're recording. Christina Moya from UC Davis, anthropology professor there, is joining us today. Christina, we're super happy to have you.
Thanks so much for having us. Well,
Um,
us, me, the royal
yeah.
us.
All of us.
Christina, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Christina, I was thinking about this, like I was thinking yesterday, like what to say about you. And I think honestly, you're probably one of the people who has like most changed my mind of any person I've
Wow.
talked to. Yeah. Um, and we can get into sort of what that is, but I mean, the short version is like you were a student at UCLA, I was a student at UCSB, and the idea of sort of cultural evolution and the validity of it and why it was important and how it fits with natural selection or biological evolution is something that you and I, over kind of conversations as we were graduate students, we just went over year. And, I really learned a lot talking from you. And, you convinced me that cultural evolution is a thing and it's important to understand. And so thank you for doing that. It's nice to be
Oh
able to
my
say
gosh,
that
that's
out
like the
loud.
nicest thing I'm gonna hear this week, I'm sure.
So we're going to end the episode right now. So thanks for joining
Yeah.
us. And on a high note,
Done,
yes,
done. Like
exactly.
mission accomplished.
Yes.
Dave, why don't you should tell the world, but I convinced you I'm done.
Oh, I mean, I was already on board with cultural evolution. I think there's a bit
Yeah.
of a difference between the UCLA and UCSB schools of thought. I think UCLA is more like let's marry the two approaches of, classic to be Cosmides Evpsych and, Boydian cultural evolution. They're compatible. Let's find, how they, inform each other, and that's very much Clark Barrett's approach that he put forward in his excellent book, The Shape of Thought. We're getting a little in the weeds here,
No, it's great. No, Shape of Thought is great. Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but I feel like, yeah, no, the UCSB school is more like we're going to stick to the Bible, the To Be and Cosmedes Bible, and anything outside of that, we're going to be a little hostile to. Is that unfair, Dave?
No, I think I was embodying that, and I think during
Hmm.
this conversation with Christina, and I mean
Yeah.
Christina, I also have great guilt because we're working on this paper, and maybe we can talk a little bit about why we wrote the paper because I think in some sense time has assassinated it to some degree for us, but I think it's still worth doing the paper. I mean,
Yeah.
but basically, David, and we can explain because there's going to be different audiences for this. Some people who know us, some people who don't know anything about this. But I think this goes in the category of like the people you fight with are the people that you're closest to. And so compared to everyone else in the world,
Mm.
UCLA, so Rob Boyd, Pete Richardson, taking an evolutionary approach to understanding cultural dynamics, and then Lita Cosmides and John Tooby taking an evolutionary perspective to understand cultural dynamics through psychology. I mean, that's like really similar. UCLA, UCSB, really close by. And, I wasn't there for all of the controversy. I heard stories about it from more senior folks like Clark. But I do understand that there was sort of controversy. But I think our generation, Christina, you and I, we were the on the ground grad students, sort of resolving what that conflict was.
And I would say I wouldn't want to diminish that some people do like I still hear from some parts of the evolutionary social sciences kind of this wariness about evolutionary psychology specifically, right?
Mm,
Um, and that I think is born out of maybe like some of what the worst part of that work might be, but also some of these old conflicts that haven't been totally resolved. So to your point, Dave, that I do think there is still value in saying where is there division of labor and where is there true disagreement? Like that was kind of one of our goals there because and I try to do this even now that I'm undergraduate teaching, which I guess you're starting as well, right?
yeah.
Like thinking about how do we teach our students to make sure that, they're going to hear different stories from different classes and to recognize the value of different fields and different approaches as specialization to
Mm,
some
Hmm.
extent. But then
Yeah.
also being able to engage like when it really is when there really are debates, like trying to figure out like where is the debate, like name that debate and
Mm.
figure out is it something tractable from a scientific perspective, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think there might be some of those still, but I think some of them it's increased, like you said, that time has assassinated that paper. I think that some of the big debates that remain are like about just really hard to answer questions, maybe intractable. Um,
Hmm.
but
What
we
do
could
you
get to
think?
that.
So
Yeah,
so I'm curious. So you put that out there, and it's a really interesting distinction between like a pseudo disagreement, where there's actually no conflict, and it's just an intellectual division of labor, where we're
right.
going to focus on these questions and these topics, and we're going to focus on these questions and these topics, and then we can, meet each other in the middle when we tunnel through the mountain on either side.
Right.
Um, but there may be some genuine disagreements and genuine conflicts about how the world works.
Yeah.
What do you see that existing? And if so, what are those genuine disagreements and conflicts?
I think we could even talk about them as like different priors about how the
Hmm.
way the world works, like
Hmm.
different emphasis put on different processes as being relatively more important. And I think um, those probably come down to the field of like cooperation.
Hmm.
That's a big one. And then um, kind of how much information has to be in the mind or how strong do those priors that natural selection endowed us with have to be or how are they structured to be able to get us like the full range of complex behavior that we see today. And so I
Hmm.
think we start with different assumptions or different at least priors. I would like to think that hopefully we can all update our beliefs as Dave has. um,
Yeah.
but it's hard sometimes, right? Like we have a lifetime of living our world in our subfields.
Yeah.
But those two questions, I think, are ones that we start with different. expectations of the world.
Yeah. So just to clarify for people who don't know,
Yeah.
a prior is in Bayesian mathematics, it's the expectation you have that a certain hypothesis is true before you encounter the evidence, and then you update your prior once you get the evidence. What's interesting about you highlighting this disagreement about what the prior is that I think the difference in priors is itself about our priors. Because
Right.
so we come to
This is getting
on
too
the
meta
more
for me. More, tell me
I was
more.
just
okay. So on one perspective, let's say we come to the world with a rich set of priors
Hmm.
about how reality works.
Hmm.
We're expecting to receive certain kinds
Yep.
of really precise inputs. And we come to the world with a wide variety of hypotheses about how the world is structured, plants, animals, people, social categories, etc. And the other perspective is when we come into the world and our priors are actually quite relaxed and we're kind of
Right.
open to any kind of input. And we sort of, the mind sort of evolves based very contingently on the input. And we don't really have, a strong expectation one way or the other. And the development of the mind is very much a product of the inputs themselves and not of the priors that we have before we get the input. Is that
Yeah, that's one of the
one way
big
of
debates.
characterizing?
I think
Yeah.
that's true. I think that's one of the big debates. And then I think the other one, which we can or don't have to talk about, is like what helps explain like large scale cooperation,
Right.
or
Mhm.
most of cooperation, maybe with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. That's a really good way of putting the debate about the nature of the mind, or
Priors
the
about priors.
priors about
Yeah.
priors, exactly.
Super meta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christina, we'll start talking about your research too. Do you think this is a choose your own adventure? Do you think it's useful to talk about when you said sort of we in different areas have different fields? Do you think it would be helpful to sort of sketch out what the different areas are um, of the social sciences, like kind of like a
Yeah.
recapitulation? Because we haven't really done that. We've sort of
Okay.
de facto had lab experimentalists on, and then
Mhm.
also field anthropologists. And I can almost hear people listening who don't know already sort of the topography or the map of the landscape of who does this thing that I would expect, a podcast with evolutionary psychology in the title, people might be imagining certain things and not other things. That's different than sort of those of us who are actually in it. Would it be okay to sort of, what's your take on sort of what is the landscape of who does it and what is that division of labor?
Yeah. There's this classic paper that tries to divide the evolutionary social sciences, like in the early 2000s, by Eric Smith into three flavors, right? So maybe that's a place to start. I think it's gotten more complicated to some extent, but some of the three flavors are, one coming from the psychology, like growing up out of psychology and maybe cognitive sciences as well, which is evolutionary psychology per se, that is kind of trying to do well. You guys could. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You guys could probably define it better, but my understanding is kind of make sense of the computational machinery that evolves and including its contingencies, right? Which is something that I think a lot of people get wrong. Like, how does it
Mhm.
take input
Yeah.
to adapt to the current world that it sees,
Right,
right? So it
right.
is a contingent machinery
Mhm.
that is under investigation by most evolutionary psychologists. And to some extent, then there's another field that traditionally has been called human behavioral ecology that's coming out of anthropology, and to some extent, like more rooted in animal behavior as well, I would say,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
ethology, given that the tools of behavioral ecology, basically how do animals, including humans, um, respond adaptively to the environments that they see. Like again, if it sounds so similar to some extent, right? Because
Mm.
you're saying
Right.
it's about how do the inputs into the psychology um, or into the mind that behavioral ecologists tend to black box because they're trained more as biologists and anthropologists. How
Mhm.
do the different environments that serve as inputs kind of get translated into adaptive behavior? And the
Mhm.
classic assumption in behavioral ecology, or at least their area of investigation, is that, we're going to be investigating the adaptive out, um, kind of parts of the phenotype, and we're kind of going to ignore the neutral forces in evolution for now, because whenever you see something that um, kind of looks like a complex behavior, it's probably there by design. It's a little bit of a
Mhm.
simplifying assumption with the kind of the recognition that those are models and that probably there are non-adaptive phenotypes as
Mhm.
well.
Right.
And
Mhm.
then Gosh, where does cultural evolution come from? Like it has a complicated history because it's using like in the 70s, like it, develops using population genetic models is where it first
Mm,
kind of gets to be formalized. And there are people working on it who are geneticists, who are ecologists. Yeah, I guess like not necessarily squarely in the anthropology tradition when it first gets developed by people like Mark Feldman, Cavalli Sforza, Pete Richardson, and Robert Boyd.
mhm,
Um, at least the first instantiation, I think it's expanded what that means, but then it gets kind of rooted in more ethnographic work as well. So I think it tends to get
mhm,
done more in anthropology departments, even though it has that history. And it's trying to make sense of it has a couple questions at its heart, like why are humans a cultural species? Like what was that good for? How can we make sense of um, our cultural nature? Like when would culture, meaning social learning from others, and there are other entailments. A lot of species do social learning, but humans do social learning at a massive scale, and we kind of accumulate it intergenerationally in a way that some people like to distinguish as culture,
mhm,
or at least cumulative culture. And so how did that get off the ground? How can that evolve? And then what are the consequences of having those kinds of um, that type of cultural cognition for the way
mhm,
that behavior is shaped? And so it does have at least part of it is a psychological question also of like, what is that? How did natural selection shape our social learning capacities? Right.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
so
I
is
think.
that
Cool.
Oh,
fair?
go ahead. Yeah,
That's good. I mean,
I
I
think that's
want to
great.
add
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
one more chess piece on the board. So cultural evolution itself has different factions within it. So
Yes,
there's
yes.
the school coming out of, Rob Boyd, Joe Henrik. It's very much about how culture accumulates in an adaptive way, and it talks, it's about cultural adaptation and about how cultures are smarter than any individual.
We
And
did
then
the
there's a
we did the
different,
canoe and kayak example on the
yes,
podcast a couple episodes ago. So we did the classic Christina, just to let you know, sort of what we
Okay,
talked
okay,
about.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And then you were thinking
Um,
about the Sperberrian kind
Yes,
of
and then
school
on
of
the
thought. Yeah.
other side of the pond, we have the sort of French or the Paris School of Cultural Evolution, pioneered by Dan Sperber, currently put forward by people like Hugo Mercier, Nicolas Baumard, Pascal Boyer in America, and this approach is derives less from population genetics and more from
Mhm.
epidemiology. So it
Right.
looks at culture not necessarily as an engine of adaptation, but just as a spreader of representations.
Right.
And in order to understand how these representations spread, you need a more detailed and thorough model of what's going on in the mind. So you need to know what ideas are sticky, what ideas are memorable, what ideas are counterintuitive or intuitive, and that helps you predict which ideas or which representations are going to be stickier or going to persist. It's very much, and it's more of a psychologically informed approach than the Boydian school of cultural evolution. Increasingly, I think they're beginning to merge, and there's becoming less and less of a distinction between them. But that is another
Yep.
piece of the puzzle.
I guess I would add also,
Yeah.
kind of across the pond as well, the
Mhm.
kind of a British tradition that is also more grounded in animal behavior as well. And
Mhm.
sometimes there's still some of their practitioners are in biology departments, um, that looks at social learning in non-human animals, and often goes, is this a fair characterization? But like the concept of niche construction, the fact that
Mm, yeah.
that non-human animals as well kind of socially learn, or even if they are not socially learning, they construct different niches. They change their environment in some
Mm,
ways that are parallel to the ways that humans change their environments, and therefore are create new forces of selection. And the classic case of that would be um, like a beaver dam, which
yeah.
actually now I feel bad. I don't know how socially learned that is. Is that did they
Yeah, I
just
know.
get to do that like totally with genetic
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not,
adaptations?
as we joke, I'm not that kind of doctor. Like, I don't
Yeah,
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what kind
It
of
would be
doctor.
fascinating to look at,
If
to
there's a
what
beaver
extent beaver,
specialist
yeah.
listening, please reach out. We would love to have
Yeah,
you on. I would love to talk about
I'd love to
beavers.
have a
yeah.
beaver focused episode. That'd be
That would be
fantastic.
great.
But even
Yeah.
if whichever its source is, like it is a new, like those dams then create like new
Mm.
environments that shape. evolution.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Hmm.
so both for that reason that new niches are created in the same way that culture and humans creates new niches, and for the reason that like social learning is just so prevalent in so many different species. There's also that
Hmm.
kind of that focus of research that's, somewhere between comparative cognition and animal behavior and cultural evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When yeah, we should have the Stu West folks out, like Nikolai Rahani and Max Barton Jones out, and just all kinds of people. Christina, you worked with Rob Boyd,
Hmm.
and you talked about sort of cultural evolution, human behavior ecology, and psych. How do you think of yourself, or how did you get to Rob Boyd? What was I actually don't think I know this story.
Oh my goodness, this is like just because I was such a naive undergraduate and I did an undergraduate, so this might be relevant to a lot of listeners, is like I did an undergraduate degree in a place that did not have evolutionary social sciences.
Me
It
too.
was
Me too.
yeah, I was at Berkeley, and in fact like all of the biological anthropologists had kind of been kicked out of that department. So then I just kind of pieced together classes that from different fields, from psychology, from anthropology. I actually did a double major with psych and anthro, but
Yeah.
from biology as well, that had something to do with human evolution. Um, and then I just started trying. I forgot how I found them, but I just found like the universities in the world that had um, those fields well represented, and UCLA and came out as one that did have a lot of expertise. And I actually did like that. At UCLA, there were people who were more psychologically focused, and also ones who were more anthropologically and cultural evolutionarily focused. Um, but yeah, it was almost like an accident of history because I didn't really know what I was getting myself into.
Mm.
And then like how I identify today, I usually just say I'm an evolutionary anthropologist because it's like so inclusive,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm in an anthropology department. Um, but that can mean that I study like Homo erectus fossils, which I definitely don't.
Right.
Although Homo erectus is awesome. Maybe you guys could have some paleo people here
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
But
If somebody gave you a fossil, you would be happy to look at it, but
I teach
it's
about
not
it
your
actually.
expertise.
But
Oh, that's great.
it's not my expertise.
Right, right. So when you got to UCLA and like how, and you don't have, we can like edit this or you cut it out. Like, what was the training like with Rob Boyd and Pete Richardson? And you're the first sort of representative from that. And, I've
Hmm.
had lovely conversations with both of them. They've been wonderful. I've gotten to know them more. What was it like sort of in that? We've had a bunch of CEP people on, but we haven't had a lot of UCLA folks on. What was the feeling there, and sort of what was like when you show up and what you start to study, and maybe this can be a segue also into like what your in your day job sort of thinking, not just about like these broad field wide things, but sort of what you study, and what you're really passionate about. Um, yeah, either scientifically or sort of personally, what was it like to sort of start there, and what was the trajectory sort of for you there?
So I wish I could recreate that environment because it was so intellectually stimulating. Like we had it was a community of people who studied evolution of human behavior and cognition. So Clark Barrett, Dan Fessler, Rob Boyd were there, and then several behaviorally oriented primatologists. So Susan Perry, Joe Manson, and Joan Silk.
Mm,
They were kind of the core when I first got there. Some people have since joined. And we would have weekly speaker series that would bring people from all sorts of different fields, like across the social sciences, across the natural sciences, some people in the humanities. Like it was just really rich intellectual environment. And we'd also have a seminar that every um, fall, all of those faculty, it was like an amazing faculty to student ratio, right? Would give us feedback on what we were up to. And then we also had a really good kind of culture of engaging just kind of on a regular basis, kind of informally and socially. And so just having so many different people who are focusing on evolutionary approaches to behavior, including across some species, was really stimulating to the point that like it didn't particularly feel like I was any one particular person's student.
mm,
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and And of
It's
course
kind of
it like
cool.
became more relevant as like but the expectation was that we would take seminar like whenever those people would offer seminars, the expectation was that if we could make it, we would try to make those people seminars
Yeah.
um, for
Yeah.
graduate students. Um, and then of course as we got into more the nitty-gritty of like each particular like a dissertation topic, we'd start talking more to and have like yeah, committees that were more focused, but we would still be getting all of that feedback from these kind of structure, these institutional structures. So that was really great. Um, it was a very supportive community, but like each faculty also had like very different advising styles. So
Yeah.
um,
Cool. When did you get your PhD there?
2012 was a
Oh,
long,
we
okay,
just
but
missed each other. I started in 2013.
okay,
So we
okay, because I
just
was like,
because
I
you're
knew you were
describing your
there.
experiences, it was like I had the same
Yeah,
experience at UCLA as well in that
yeah,
environment. I was actually in the psychology department,
right.
but I was sort of considered an honorary anthropologist because I spent way more time with the anthropology people than with the psychology people, just because
Yeah,
there was more evolution happening in the
yeah,
anthropology department. And so, yeah, I also got to experience that, diversity of different perspectives and the richness of, the faculty members. It was a really cool
yeah,
experience.
yeah.
So,
And they have it just seems like it keeps growing. I don't know how they do that.
Yeah.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
We David did mention though, he talked to Dan Fessler and he was like, this whole like, fieldwork thing, do I actually have to do it? And Dan was like, yep. And David was like, nope, not for me. Uh,
I do wonder about that, like who gets attracted to different fields based on kind of the expectations and
yeah.
um yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
do think fieldwork is really valuable and
But yeah,
How
it
absolutely. I
is
just don't want to do it myself.
yeah, yeah, but it is really hard. Like I think there's a
Yeah.
bit of like a taboo in anthropology to talk about like the difficulties of fieldwork
Mm,
Hmm.
because it might mean that like you're not cut out for it or you're not strong enough or you're not being socially gracious enough and it is
Hmm.
like I at least my experiences have been quite difficult and
Yeah.
so but I don't want to dissuade people from doing it because it is I think a necessary part of a robust evolutionary social science, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I
I mean,
almost want to like say thank you for your service whenever we have an
I know, I
anthropologist
know,
on.
I
Like, I
know.
have that impulse.
Uh,
Like, I can't believe you're doing this,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting here in the comfort of my home in Los Angeles.
We
Like, I feel so
yeah.
guilty. I don't know.
Good, you
Especially in the
should.
yeah, especially
Yeah,
in
maybe
like
I
the
should. Yeah.
especially in the low latitude, like like very high like pathogen parasite load
Right.
places where like I mean like people just like at these conferences like pulling up their shirts comparing their scars for where like a worm ate into their torso. Sorry if people are eating while they're listening to this, but
I mean, to be honest and frank, like I actually chose where I work. So I wanted to work on ethnolinguistic boundaries and kind of that's something like all primates, you could think of all primates living in some kind of group, even if there's some solitary ones, but most of them have some social grouping. But we're pretty weird in that we have these like ethno-linguistic boundaries. And that's what motivated me to do field work in a place where like ethno-linguistic boundaries were quite different from the ones we see in the US. Like there's so much social psychology on like ethno-racial taxonomy in the US, but that's pretty weird system, right?
mm.
But you could go to a lot of places to study ethno-linguistic boundaries that are interesting, and I definitely chose one that was above the mosquito line. I'm not gonna
Oh,
lie.
nice.
So I have very little oxygen where I work in the Peruvian Altiplano. It's at like 13,000 feet above sea level,
Wow.
or th 3,800 meters. I don't know who your audience is,
Yeah.
but there are no mosquitoes, and that's
Yeah.
really valuable to me. But to me, like the difficulty is actually like the social difficulty more
Mm.
than like the environmental.
Yeah. Do
But
you when you come back from the field site, do you feel like a superhero? Like you can just run around when you get to sea
yeah,
level? Yeah.
I I when I was at UCLA, I would swim sometimes with. Do you guys know Andreas Wilke? He's also an
Of
evolutionary
course.
psychologist.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Andreas. Well, I have a lot to say about Andreas, but I'll just shut up and let you tell your
And
story.
can I shame him online? You could cut
Please,
this if you think
please, yeah,
it's
we can cut out. Hi
inappropriate.
Andreas. Guten Tag. Yeah. Okay.
So he's a really large, strong German with very little hair, and which
Yes.
is important for the swimming part, right? Like
Yeah.
hydrodynamic. And
Mhm.
usually, like it wasn't a competitive endeavor
I
because
see.
there's like
I see where
no
this is
way
going.
that I could beat him. But it's not that I was stronger after coming up down to sea
Yeah.
level from the high altitude. It's that I could stay underwater for longer.
Nice. So
So
you just beat Andreas.
I
Yeah.
I don't know that he knows that I beat him, but I was
Well,
keeping track.
now he does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the hemoglobin's amazing.
Fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about so ethnolinguistic boundaries are super interesting. We just had Brenda Bowser on talking about that
Yeah.
with Shuar, Achwar, Kichwa.
Yeah.
My ignorance is overwhelming, so apologies. But um, that's a really interesting issue and question. And there's also the field site. Can you tell us a little bit about like how did you, so you get to UCLA, there's all these people. Like, what is it like, or how do you pick a field site? Like, I actually don't know any of this. Like, where do you go from like you're
Yeah.
walking around, is it Haynes Hall and UCLA, doing stuff in Southern California to how do you get to Peru
Yeah.
and study ethno-linguistic groups?
I think everybody has a slightly different path. I was lucky that actually in undergraduate, I mentioned there weren't evolutionary social scientists, but I was lucky that I worked with some archaeologists, Christine Hastorf, who helped me get to the Peruvian altiplano to like help with archaeological and some ethnoarchaeological fieldwork. So I did some interviews in undergraduate in the Bolivian side of the boundary. And I had read some on also some ethnolinguistic boundaries in Panama that I thought would be interesting to study. But I ended up, you know, it. I I will admit that like the fact that mosquitoes much more really love me and much more common where I would have been working in Panama did play a role in saying like, well,
Yeah.
actually the ethnolinguistic boundary between Quechua and Aymara speakers sounds pretty interesting. And I was also lucky that there were not social science or not ethnographers who were working in that area, but archaeologists at UCLA who worked in the area where I wanted to work with Quechua and Aymara speakers. So I did have a little bit of previous experience knowing that I would be, environmentally comfortable enough
Yeah.
in that area, and that there was like something interesting to study there. And there's was very little previous work done on interactions, at least definitely no evolutionary work done on interactions between Quechua and Aymara speakers, but I don't think that's the great barometer. But more generally, like relatively little kind of anthropological work
Yeah.
done in that area. So yeah,
Cool.
it was a confluence of convenience, having good social connections, and then it being an appropriate place to study the questions that I wanted to study.
Yeah. And what can you set up? Like, what is the scientific question?
Rationale, right?
Yeah.
So for my dissertation, I wanted to know whether actually it comes back to priors a bit. Like I wanted to know if humans kind of had genetically evolved priors for thinking about learning about certain kinds of social groups that were present in humans and we know not present in our closest relatives. And those are symbolically marked groups of people that oftentimes share cultural traits, oftentimes are marked by linguistic boundaries. It was another reason why Dave and I have talked a lot because Dave, I think, has done some research to suggest that, yeah, maybe it looks like humans are thinking about language in a way that's language differences, linguistic differences in a way that's fundamentally different to the way that we think about race and
Right.
coalitions,
Right.
right? And so um, that in the American context, those boundaries that like sociologists, that social psychologists tend to look at between like African American and European American and Hispanic of various kinds, and Asian American, they're just I mean, like all boundaries are complex, but these have been really studied and they confound a lot of different processes, including the fact that um, they're the result of long distance, oftentimes forcible or self-selected migrations um, that then come with incredible economic differences and power differentials and then get perpetuated. And these power
Right.
differentials get perpetuated by institutional structures. Um, there is residential segregation, but like in a very weird kind of way, right? Like sometimes it's um, because of policies like redlining, like
Yeah.
it's not, but sometimes it's because of like the patterns of migration. So it's kind of unlike most of the boundaries that we think were probably important for human evolutionary history, right?
Right. So just
Um,
to interrupt, so basically if you're
yeah,
walking around or driving around or traveling around the United States, for example, or sort of North America, most of North America, and the relationship that people see between language and social interaction, or sort of what the groups look like. The idea is that if that's your intuition for sort of basing the full range of human experience or what a linguistically marked group is, the idea is that that's you're a little bit in trouble because there's a very particular history.
Right. And everybody, I don't want to presume that like I'm working with agro-pastoralists. They're sedentary, they're agricultural societies. Like I don't want to presume that this is the type of boundary that like represents human Paleolithic. Like that doesn't really make sense either. But it is quite different in important ways, right? They have been so Quechua and Aymara speakers, they are speaking totally mutually unintelligible languages, which is also quite interesting. But they're languages that, as far as we can tell, have been in touch with each other for centuries.
Hmm.
And nobody, yeah, they've mutually influenced each other. Um, and nobody in the area where I work is like, oh, we've been here longer and you guys are recent migrants and maybe you don't belong and maybe you should go back to where you come from. Like that's not a part of the rhetoric because for
Hmm.
time immemorial, obviously everybody comes from somewhere, but like for time immemorial, like they've been in that place. The power differentials are also not like pretty much minimal compared to the power differentials that exist between like indigenous people and more mestizo or urban or market integrated people. Like that's really kind of the source of status and power differences in that society. So it's not to say that power doesn't matter, but it's just not super highly correlated with being Quechua and Maya speaking, or at least it's a different. All right. So like minimally, I think we could all agree that at least it represents some other part of like the vast diversity that
Right.
human social boundaries yeah, represented in
Yeah.
human social
Interesting.
boundaries. But maybe we could even go a little bit further to say that like the lower status differentials, the fact that there aren't phenotypic differences like that are not cultural, like marked morphological differences between Quechua and Aymara speakers that are important to them. Um, and that one of them isn't like a recent migrant and the other one's not like a kind of a host, that those might be informative for some kinds of boundaries that are important to human evolution.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting set of distinctions you made between sort of the group dynamics that we see in the US, for example, and the group dynamics that you see in the communities you study. So here are we have a strong correlation between group and class.
Right.
We have this immigrant native dynamic as well, and you throw in the dynamics of political coalitions and how different ethnic groups are associated with different political coalitions,
Sure.
and you get a kind of volatile mix that can perpetuate, conflict, stereotypes, animosity, and so forth. In the communities you study, insofar as there is conflict and animosity, if it's not coming from the sources that we're familiar with here, where it's like conflicts over, social class, natives versus immigrants, conflicts over political power, and so forth. If it's not coming from there, then where is it coming from? What do you think is the source of the intergroup hostility, if there is any?
So where I work, there isn't that much intergroup hostility, which is also
Okay,
quite nice. But there,
interesting.
but there is, but
Hmm.
it's not. So um, it's like these are not at war. But in recent memory, and to some extent now, there are like land conflicts that don't result in like war or anything like that or raiding. But there are land conflicts, and those tend to be like the organizational structures that um, kind of rural Altiplano people have for dealing with those land conflicts are usually at the community level, right? So it's like, what is the boundary of this community versus this other community? And they can call
Hmm.
on other members of their community oftentimes to like help um, deal with those kinds of conflicts.
Hmm.
Um, but the big conflicts are again like something not around in the Paleolithic. The big conflicts are with like the massive power differentials with the state and the urban people that kind of are represented um, by. I mean, I don't. It is a bit of it is a racialized. Let me see. How should I say this? There is a morphological variation that's associated with this. Like 100%, the people who are wealthier in Peru tend to be less ancestrally indigenous, for example. Like
Hmm.
have more European ancestry. And this is something very common in Latin America, which is really striking, like every time you look at TV that shows like the centers of power and who is elite culturally in a society. They're like so unrepresentative of the kind of diversity of Latin American societies.
Hmm.
And in Peru, that's very striking. So you get very, very white, like European ancestry looking people kind of representing the elites of Peruvian society. And people increasingly have like access to TVs and satellites and phones in the rural area. So they know that. Um, but it is complicated by the fact that it's not a super racialized boundary. Traditionally, like in Peruvian society and in the Andes, like moving to the cities and losing your indigenous language capacity is seen as like a form of ethnic change in a sense, an
Is
important.
it seen as like a betrayal to your
It
group?
can. It seems like
Uh,
it does cause some like both admiration and resentment is my sense of
mm,
that, right? There's like
okay.
envy that goes along with it, but also um, admiration because frankly, like a lot of people want to be able to live in the bigger cities in Lima or Arequipa or maybe even
Hmm.
Juliaca, which is like a more local big city. Like so there's so much um yeah, desire
Interesting.
to have your students, like your kids educated, be good students, and then have a good job. Like everybody aspires to that, even if it's not attainable.
Yeah.
Hmm. So it's almost like what you're saying is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is a difference between the ethnolinguistic
Yes.
divides and the divides that actually create conflict and
Yes.
hostility. So
Right.
when you have an ethno-linguistic divide, that doesn't necessarily lead to animosity. What leads to
Right.
animosity is something that we'd actually be more familiar with as Westerners, like a conflict over land or territory, or a conflict between high status and low status, or groups' relative positions in a social hierarchy. That those are really the drivers of conflicts, not ethno-linguistic differences per se.
I think that's fair. And I think that we see, I'm not the first person to say
Mhm.
that we're not the first people to highlight that. Um, but it could, like, I guess the question that remains in my mind, and I'm not sure that I've resolved this for myself or that I have a very strong belief, is like, does the fact that a boundary is ethno-linguistic or culturally structured make it more plausible that that
Mm,
conflict
Right.
arise
Right.
or exacerbate the conflict once it does arise? And I
Yeah.
mm,
think we can't really answer that question with one case study. Like that's a type of work that requires kind of multi-sided comparative research. But yeah, like we've seen in the Balkans, for example, some boundaries that do matter that are or in that case, it's amazing. Like there is barely an ethno-linguistic boundary, and yet
Right.
people really
mm,
fight over it. And in other
yeah.
places like Switzerland, where language has divided, or people are very multilingual in Switzerland. They have four official languages, but it has, the Swiss identity overrides that linguistic variation and
Right.
been
Mm,
a pretty stable nation state for centuries. So
Yeah.
um,
mm,
I don't know. I still don't know if it, just by virtue of, for example, like inhibiting communication or when it's a more structured ethnic boundary where there are more cultural norms that are different between each other, which is not so much the case among Quechua and Aymara where I work, where like at the very local level where I work, Quechua and Aymara speakers are pretty similar culturally. And so that also probably mitigates conflict. I'd be my guess, but I think it is possible that like with more cultural variation, then it just becomes like harder to coordinate with each other and
mm.
come to agreement. So I think that's possible, but I think it hasn't really been totally demonstrated.
Yeah. Just
That'd be
for
hard
sort
to.
of the people like me who are slow to catch up, sort of, or for people who may not know, like what is so you talked about Quechua Aymara. What is the relationship between them other than not super conflictual or like you're in a field site? Can you just like walk us through like
Yeah,
do they
sure.
live different places? Like I don't know anything. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So there is a boundary. If you're in rural community, that's maybe let's say um, a community of let's say 20 to 100 families, let's say. Those tend to be only Quechua speaking or only Aymara speaking, with like a handful of people, like especially younger people who have maybe migrated in at marriage, like that married across that language boundary.
Mm,
But then there are these towns, like the one that I did my dissertation in Watasani is like a town where it's pretty split because that's kind of a stepping stone of rural to urban migration. Um, you can have some, um, yes, everybody kind of does some agriculture and some pastoralism, but you can also have your little shop there, or you can make it easier for your kids to go to the high school, which is in town. And there it's much more mixed. The high school, when I was working there, had about 70% of its students were Quechua speaking and 30% were Aymara speaking. And then you have these opportunities to go to even larger market towns where, for example, Huancane is the nearest market town that everybody in this area would go to pretty regularly, once a week or every 2 weeks. And that is squarely on the Aymara speaking side of the boundary, but people from both sides of the boundary go. And then you have even a larger city that's about an hour and a half bus ride away called Juliaca. And again, because it's a center of urban rural migration, it's just very heavily mixed between Quechua and Aymara speakers. And of course, increasingly just Spanish monolingual speakers as well. So there are all these opportunities for interaction in markets, in schools, and increasingly, well, at marriage. So there was a sociologist who did work there in the 70s in Watasani who did document already at that time quite a lot of intergroup marriages as well.
Okay. Yeah. So can I just so the idea is that in the rural areas, roughly speaking, because I think people are asking like what maintains the linguistic difference. It's sort of the rural areas, just the way it works, where like, you grow up and what do the people around you speak, you learn that. But then if people are moving in from the rural areas, there's more contact. Is
Yeah,
that fair?
I
Or
think
is
that's
that,
probably
yeah,
true. I guess that is an interesting question of what maintains cultural boundaries if there's constant contact,
yeah,
right? And the
Hmm.
default would be something like that. People don't interact. I think that there's reason to be skeptical that generally that's the only process, right? And I don't know enough I haven't done like a quantitative study here to know exactly, but do you know William Leboeuf's work in the
yeah,
US suggests that even with contact, even with common interaction across, in his case, like dialectical
yeah,
groups, people maintain their dialects for potentially something like signaling purposes. Maybe that's too much interpretation. So I don't want to go too far on a limb to say that it's only because of a lack of interaction
right,
that
right,
they're maintained.
yeah,
And I will say that there's a lot of more Spanish speaking. And actually, I think that the kind of loss, some people don't like that term, but the loss of
yeah,
indigenous language use in the multilingual areas might be actually a bit faster because Spanish is such a useful lingua franca.
right,
So some neutral kinds of processes might be involved, but it's possible that there's also kind of identity-based reasons for
yeah. Yeah. I mean, even when I was,
maintaining it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
just, I mean, there's like even the social inputs to these learning systems, like kids learn, and Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, kids learn like what are the other kids speaking, and that's sort of what they learn. And that's why you can get something like a pidgin or turned into a Creole, which is, where there's
Right.
people forcibly removed, like, in the slaveries, in the slave trade, the adults couldn't speak a grammatical language because they were speaking they were coming from different places, brought together forcibly to work together, and so they were just sort of getting by on sort of what is called a pidgin, and then the next generation, de nouveau, the kids build that into a grammatical language. That was all often used sort of to argue against sort of a Skinnerian minimal language acquisition system to show that kids can just make up a new language, kind of
Right.
de nouveau. But it's also relevant to show that there's a lot of social cues to language learning and that you learn from other
Mm.
kids, and it's a
Mm.
coordination thing. And I mean, even when I looked at like sort of second language learning capacity, people who, for example, are like romantically involved with somebody who speaks the other language are much more likely to learn it,
Mm.
independent of sort of like the age at which they, show up. Like obviously, like when you're young, it's better because that system's turned on. But I think there's probably all kinds of social cues, even of sort of quote unquote like more prototypical language learning, as opposed to sort of something like a dialect. And I mean, the boundaries are all fuzzy, but there's all this code switching stuff of, how do you speak
Hmm.
when you're in a professional context versus with your friends, and these cohort, generational effects. So yeah, I just wanted to flesh that out. But yeah, that's really interesting, Christina. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's interesting about the romantically involved. I wonder if they're also accounting for just having more access to a teacher.
Yeah, I
But I take your point, like the
yeah,
motivations matter, right?
yeah, yeah,
And we do see people who were trilingual even in this area, or who were who were vendors, and so therefore had more of an incentive to learn a little bit of the other language, right? Because
yeah,
they'd want to go to the market towns on both sides of the border.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, David, you were gonna say something. Yeah.
No, I mean, I have a thousand questions running through my head. I mean, one thing that is popping into my head is something that stuck with me when we had Brenda Bowser on, and she mentioned that there was a pretty strong difference between saying I am a member of Group
Mm,
X versus I am with a member of Group X.
yeah.
So the former is sort of marking your ethnolinguistic membership, and the
Yeah.
latter is more of a political
Yeah.
statement that I am loyal to this group and I'm going to support them in whatever
Yeah.
conflict might be underway. Do you see a similar distinction in the communities you study between belonging to a group and being with or loyal to a group?
Yeah, that's such a good distinction. The Something maybe a little bit parallel to get me to start thinking about this is the fact that when I would ask people if they were Quechua or Aymara when I first got there, and they wouldn't really use those terms. They would say
Mhm.
quechuista or aymarista. So the ista ending is the same as the English ist, right? Which to me denotes kind of like a practice, like a maybe
Hmm.
potentially like temporary identity. Like I'm a socialist. I could stop being a socialist tomorrow and become a
Right.
capitalist or an
Right.
Interesting.
anarchist.
I'm a
Um,
flautist. Yeah, exactly.
that's true.
Yeah,
Once a flautist, always a flautist.
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
Um,
really interesting. I mean, it sounds kind of odd to substitute it with like West, like it would be very weird to say I'm a whiteist. It would make me sound,
right, right.
No, that sounds really bad.
it sounds terrible actually.
Yeah.
And yet that's sort of how it's linguistically differentiated.
Yeah, so that's how they would use well, and but then if you looked at the signs, like the political signs when you walk into town,
Hmm.
it when I got there, it would say the land of Quechuas and Aymaras. And so they would use like to actually I think like a more essentializing language, like you are a Quechua, you are
Right.
Aymara. You don't practice Quechua, you don't practice Aymara. But the
Hmm.
people would use the ist, the practice Quechua and practice Aymara. And I did do some studies where I would ask people like, well, what if somebody marries in, learns the language, becomes fully competent? Are they like how Quechua are they, or how Quechuista are they?
Hmm.
And you would become Quechuista. Like most people would say that I would become Quechuista. Like if they admired my attempts at Quechua, but they're not
Hmm.
nearly as fluent as they could be. Um, and so like it wasn't about ancestry. It wasn't about being for your life. It was about practicing for them. I am currently now doing like more regional studies, like at farther away from the border, and I am getting the suspicion, the impression, I should say, that that less essentialist attitude um, might be more common closer to the boundary, and that people farther from the boundary might have more of these
Hmm.
like and do seem to be using like their Quechua, their
Interesting.
Aymara.
Could you unpack what this word essentialist mean? Because it's a really important
Yes,
concept and it might not be
right.
familiar to
Oh my
everyone.
Yeah,
gosh.
it's
And I've worked.
really complicated
I
too. So it's really
know.
hard. Yeah.
So let me use for now. I was using it as an operational definition. I was using it to mean kind of like a fixed part of somebody's identity. But
Hmm.
people really debate whether essentialism has to be also uh, like something that you're born with, if it has to be thought of as something that is genetically transmitted or as if genetically transmitted, and
Hmm.
whether people have to have kind of this notion in their head that it's some deep core part of you that then has these like multiple outward manifestations. So do
Hmm.
people do use it differently? Some of the classic work, I think we're almost all of your listeners are going to be essentialists about species. So that's a good
Right.
place to start.
Right.
Where if people do really fucked up experiments, even with kids, and they ask them like, if we take a fox and then we give it plastic surgery and change how it looks and make it look like a dog, is it a fox or is it a dog? And
Hmm.
I think we all have that intuition that it would still be a fox, and that would be kind of an indicator of essentialist reasoning. Um,
So if you
I,
change the outward appearance, it still has this internal
right,
essence of dog,
of
right?
dogness. Yeah,
Dogness,
exactly. Yeah.
essence of dog. That sounds like a terrible cologne. um,
Yeah. Yeah, you're
anyway,
yeah.
you can continue.
Essence of
Yeah.
dog.
Essence. Maybe I'll
And
start selling that.
Wow.
in the human domain, we don't do anything quite so brutal, but we do often tell these stories of like, imagine that a child was born to one community and then raised by by members of a different community. What would they be? Like, to kind of
Hmm.
Brenda's
Yeah.
like
Right.
language term, like what would they be? And
Yeah.
it's very underspecified what that means,
Hmm.
being,
Exactly.
right? And
Yes.
so we don't
Yes.
Yeah.
totally know what that literature is telling us. I've done a
Yeah.
meta-analysis of it that shows that it's really variable. Like children
Mm.
around eight, like that one has been done cross-culturally quite a bit. And children tend to be a little bit on the end of essentialism, of saying that that child will be the identity of the parents,
Hmm.
of the birth parents, rather than
Mm.
the adoptive parents.
Hmm.
But by the time we get to adulthood, at least cross-culturally, it's really variable. Like
Mm.
that some people, it depends on the identity, it depends on where you're doing the study, but you get anywhere from like 90% of people saying that, I think it was like, let's say, native Fijians versus um, Indo-Fijians, like
Mm.
their identities are fixed at birth, all the way
Interesting.
to like 10% or lower of people saying that, let's say, among Himba and Herero pastoralists, like if you move at birth, and you're raised in one community, you're just going to become the member of the community that you're raised in.
Mm.
So it's really quite variable, and I'm not sure. Like if we do have priors about treating ethno-linguistic groups as kind of having some sort of essence, they're very weak priors,
Yeah.
and they're quickly overridden.
Christina, that's cool.
Mm.
And it's really, and David, I'll let you, I just, that variability, and it sounds like you're doing this meta-analysis. To me, that variability suggests that there's systems in the mind that the function is just sort of like it's social learning or prediction, right? It's sort
Hmm.
of like, what's the, what do I experience as the correlation between a social identity and what I need to do to deal with them, right? So
Yeah.
if there's like a group membership that is like belligerent towards me, if anybody can become that based on their behavior, it's in my interest to not be essentialistic about it because,
Hmm.
it the whole point of me representing that group is to predict like how they're going to treat me. So
Mm.
that's just one example, and I mean there are others. It could
Yeah.
be not how they behave, but like what do they tend to do? What are their beliefs? What are their characteristics? Where do they live? Are they good coordination partners, or just predicting
Right.
like just sort of like how they live, what they eat, how they talk, right?
Yeah.
Is that a fair characterization? Like even if we haven't, I mean, it's a huge lift to sort of wrap your head around, and I'm glad you're doing that. But
It's hard.
is that a fair characterization?
I think that for sure that it's kind of about predicting kind of correlations in the world. Now, what those correlations, which correlations matter, I think is still an open
Yeah,
question. I think like some of the early people proposing a functionalist kind of approach to essentialism, like Susan Gelman, who's a developmental psychologist,
yeah,
or Larry Hirschfeld, it's not always clear exactly what all of these proponents
yeah,
of like humans being essentialists have in mind, but it does seem to be like that this helps do the heavy lifting of being able to predict lots of different things about people. And you need to learn that there's stuff in the types
right.
in the world, and then you have to figure out like who's going to be a good partner to do, who's going to be easy to coordinate with. Like you're going to be able to predict lots of things once you figure out what the types are in the world.
Hmm.
What we're seeing so far in the meta-analysis, although it's the sample of societies where we've done these studies, but it does seem like it's more likely when there are power differentials across those boundaries.
Mm,
Mm.
And so
interesting.
so it might be that some kinds of predictions are more important than others, right? And the
Right.
predictions about um, kind of whether you can transcend that boundary, whether there are barriers in place
I
to be able
see.
to move across that boundary might matter. And
Mm.
it's a bit mixed. Like we did not see that when I collaborated with Brooke Shelza to do this among Himba Herero. Well, she did it with Himba participants, but thinking about the Herero and Damara boundary, where one of those has a big power difference and the other one does not.
Mm,
Um,
Mm.
or like pretty much 100% of her participants said that they would prefer their daughters to marry a Herero person than a Damara person. So clearly there's a status difference there. And yet that didn't really correspond to, or at least our measure of essentialism. But other studies done with like the Indian caste system, which is very hierarchical, very rigid, kind of you could call it class more than class hierarchy. Um, there you do see these asymmetries, and Mahalingam has showed that, for example, higher caste individuals are more rigid about that boundary. Like you cannot become one of us
right,
than the lower caste individuals who
right,
don't maintain that boundary as rigidly.
right,
So it's probably it seems like it's not just about predicting stuff, but that it's at least by adulthood, right? Like it's work maybe in childhood it's working differently than it is in adulthood, but at least by adulthood it seems to be working kind of through this pathway of predicting certain kinds of interactions that are
right.
Mm.
possible.
Yeah,
I,
and just so I understand, sorry, David, it's just that, yeah, because the early essentialism stuff, it was great, but it was like very vague about what was being
The
predicted or what
function,
dimensions.
right?
And so what you're saying is, if I understand it, is that power and power and status and class, things like that, roughly speaking, um, that's a really privileged, it seems to be so far in some cases that it's a really privileged dimension in the sense of when those things are more open or closed correspondingly, essentialism is sort of higher or lower, meaning that if you can't become the higher class thing, then you will represent that these social categories are quote unquote more essentialized. And then there's
Yeah,
additional like sort of flavoring, which is that if you are high class, you're also incentivized to sort of be
right,
like, let's all agree on a norm where nobody can be, where I am permanently the winner of this
right.
sort of arrangement here. Is that fair?
I think so. And I think it's an open question how much this is working kind of in at the individual level, like people perceiving that
Right,
boundary versus like taking the story for give like as a like is it that
right.
people are individually interacting with others and then building
Oh,
up
I
that
see. Yeah,
sense of that boundary, or
yeah.
is it that they just have been told, you
Mm.
know, you're not going to become high class caste,
Right, right,
and
right.
that's what's being so I
mm.
don't know about we don't have the details of how that those representations arise, but yeah,
Yeah, that's really
Inter
cool. That's cool. You're making progress on that. Thank you for your
could,
maybe.
service. Yeah.
This
yeah,
one's
no, thank you.
easier.
Yeah.
I mean,
No
could it
mosquitoes.
be so could it be that when a group boundary is politicized or becomes a marker of rival conflicting
Right.
alliances, that marker becomes more essentialized so long as the marker is still present. So, for
Yeah.
example, in the United States, there are conflicts between black and white people. If a white person is raised by a black family or a black person is raised by a white family, that doesn't change their race. So the white person is
Right.
still white, even if they're raised by black parents. The black person is still black, even if they're raised by white parents. Could it be that the reason that is true is because skin color itself is a cue of alliance membership and is used by everyone else in the society as a cue of alliance membership, as Dave has shown.
Yeah.
And once a trait becomes common knowledge that that is signifying which side you're on in a particular conflict, that as long as that difference is there, it sends a signal to everyone of whose side you're on, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Whereas if there's a different marker of alliance membership, and it can change such that if you change it, then you're signaling that you're on a different side, then the essentialism goes away. That's sort of how I'm starting to try to understand what's going on here. Do you think I'm on the right track here?
I think it's a good hypothesis. I think
Hmm.
I have 2 points of skepticism. One is
Yeah.
that we also have political alliances that we're very happy for people to move between.
Hmm.
So like we're very happy to convert people to becoming Democrats or Republicans, and we don't like it's kind of the opposite of essentialism in that we want to
Right.
grow those coalitions.
Yeah.
At least it's the opposite of essentialism insofar as essentialism is about having a fixed trait,
Right.
right? Um,
Right.
and the other thing is like if I'm thinking phylogenetically, like I think. Would you guys agree with me? Like we have a coalitional psychology that we share with non-human primates. Would you
Definitely.
agree with
Yeah,
that?
Yeah,
definitely.
I think
Like
Yeah.
so.
that it's
Yeah.
pretty similar, like at least those are the building blocks,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like I'm not sure that those building blocks are essentialist either. Like I guess I
Mm.
don't know. I should know more about primate coalitions, but I would imagine that like, dominance hierarchy shift and who's alpha shifts, and then like whether beta and whatever the third primate is in the dominance hierarchy, like they might all of a sudden find themselves like on different sides of the coalition. So I'm a
Hmm.
little bit skeptical that that's kind of like that coalitional psychology is like the building block or has like a notion of fixedness
Mm.
attached to it for those reasons. I don't know what you guys think.
Right. So let me see if I can reframe the hypothesis. So with
Okay.
with the example of say switching a political party,
Yeah.
so I would imagine that some features of being a Republican or Democrat are more diagnostic of political loyalty than others.
Hmm.
Say voting for a particular party, that's probably one of the
Right.
most diagnostic. So let's say, I vote for Republican, but all of my outward beliefs are consistent with progressive ideology. I think we would have something of an essentialist intuition there that I'm still a Republican, right? Because I'm exhibiting the cue that is a stronger cue of alliance membership, even if all of my superficial features are resembling the Democrats. It's more about, secretly I'm loyal to Republicans. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
closet Republican or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would suggest that, the hypothesis is that some traits are categorized by the mind as if you have it, you're on this side. If you don't have it, you're on the other side. And I think that is more what's driving the essentialism intuitions. And of course it depends on what that thing is. If it's something that can be changed, like say voting for one party or another, then categorization will change.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that can't be changed, like skin color, then there's nothing you can do to erase that. It's always going to signify that you're on one side or the other. Does
Yeah.
that sort of track?
I mean, I still think I disagree with you, but I
Okay.
do think it's like a cool hypothesis. And like that
Okay.
idea that like essentialism is about like the core part of what essentialism is about predicting is like whose
Hmm.
side are you really on, I think is a really cool hypothesis.
Hmm.
I'm going to give you another case study. Maybe this is like too much of like an ethnographic veto
Hmm.
what
Oh no, I
anthropologists
love that.
do.
That's why you're here, is to keep us honest.
That's a
But
great
it's
expression,
like
ethnographic veto.
it's
That's
Oh
not
great.
yeah.
mine. I forget where
That's
I mean
great.
it's usually used disparagingly to be like, oh, I'm going to be the annoying
Oh,
anthropologist
I
who's
like
like,
that. I want to raise
I'm
my
gonna
hand in a talk and be like, here's an ethnographic.
yeah.
Get a sign. Put it on a
Yeah,
t-shirt. Yeah.
and I do accept that like if there are tendencies in the world, then like we should accept that there are tendencies and also the possibility to vary away from that tendency. So I don't think the ethnographic veto should be used as a like blunt instrument.
Hmm.
But
It
I
should be,
get
Christina. We should just use it as a
Oh,
but here's
No,
my
please
I'm kidding. No,
ethnographic
I'm
veto.
kidding.
beat us with that blunt instrument, please.
And it's not my work, it's Rita Astudi's work, and she's worked in Madagascar
Hmm.
with people who well, she works with the Vezo, who are Austronesian descent. So they're an indigenous um, kind of Malagasy, uh, uh, Madagascar natives. They work, I think, mostly with fishing, and they have, at least by adulthood, they have this notion that you are Vezo, that ethnic category, if you do the Vezo things. Again, kind of like
Hmm.
the ist ending, like you go fishing and you
Yeah.
um, do the kinds of work that we do. Makes you Vezo.
Hmm.
And she did these kinds of same essentialism studies, both with children and adults there, um, to ask them about this boundary with Karani, which are actually more recent migrants from India. I forget the history of their migration there. It probably had something to do with the British, but I don't remember the details. But there's like an there's an Indian origin population in Madagascar and an Austronesian kind of earlier migration to Madagascar. And they do look physically different. Like they can't change kind of your skin tone.
Hmm.
And they recognize that. Like the adults that I forget if the children, I think the children also like by age 8 or 7 or so, like they recognize that the skin tone is something that you're not going to change. And presumably like in the real world, like this does map onto some kinds of coalitions. They live in different areas, but they don't, at least by adulthood, they do not treat that cue um, as an indicator of being, right?
Hmm.
Right.
Um,
Yes. 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 Yeah.
so
Got it.
if so, you'll ask adults, Vezo adults, like if a Karani child, like a child born to Karani parents is then raised by Vezo parents, and they'll say yes, it'll be Vezo when it grows up. So I'm a little bit skeptical that
So they will
the
say that a person who looks uh,
right,
like they belong to one group and is raised by a group that looks different,
yeah,
that they will become the different looking group.
yeah, and so
So it would be
and
equivalent to say a white person becoming black by being raised by black parents.
exactly,
Interesting.
exactly,
Yeah.
and
That's
I
my reading of the literature too. That the inference about the cue and the group underlying membership, those are distinct things. And the old literature sort of conflated those. That's sort of what made it confusing. But if you tease the two apart, people will still say, look, this feature is biologically inheritable,
right.
but but that's separate from what constitutes the group identity. Sorry, Christina, I just wanted
No,
to
yeah,
So
yeah.
chime in. Yeah.
that's fascinating. So my follow-up question would be, is there a political divide or rivalry by skin color per se? So is there social stratification
Right.
based on skin color per se? Is there some kind of intergroup conflict over power or resources or status or whatever based on skin color like there is in the United States, or is it not based on
Yeah.
skin color per se?
I I suspect that it's not like institutionalized by skin color, but I'm not totally sure. I definitely should read more about this case.
Right.
And but I think that another way to talk about your hypothesis about this being about loyalty detection is
Hmm.
that if you do have this information that you are raised in a different community, like not only is that going to influence like how your cultural expectation, like your cultural worldview, it very likely is going to affect your loyalty as well, right?
Yeah,
Right.
for
Yes.
sure.
Um,
Yes.
and so I think that this idea that it's not just about predicting lots of different cultural traits, but predicting who you're loyal to, I think is a really interesting
Yes.
question.
That
Yeah.
is interesting, but you also have to consider not just the person's loyalty themselves, but how everyone else in society will treat them.
Right,
So if I'm raised by black parents, I might be loyal to the black community, but everyone else in society is still
right,
going to see me as white and give me the privileges that are granted to white people in our society,
right,
and make all sorts of assumptions about me based on my skin color, regardless of my personal loyalties. And that may itself also change my loyalties. If people are
right.
treating me differently, then that might be a factor that pushes me in a different direction than I otherwise would have gone if I was black,
Yeah,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. So
So it's
that
not just
thing.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
individual's loyalty, but it's common knowledge of the person's perceived loyalties and how they're seen by others and how that affects
yeah.
the alliances.
No, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I agree.
that is, I mean, yeah, when I talk about, the alliance stuff and sort of race or any cue, that thing is also that really inhibits individuals who want to change it, right? So even if
Hmm.
somebody says, I don't want to do this, just I don't want to discriminate based on race. Let's say somebody in like 1960s US or now, but if they see that other people are, they're still representing this is a relevant cue,
Hmm.
and it just or if people treat me based on this, but I would prefer we didn't. They didn't. It makes the individual decision is not sufficient to stop the cue from being relevant because it's a coordination thing that it requires common knowledge. And so especially when that's why you need like larger scale coordination to sort of stop using a cue or circumstances to change or institutions to change, precisely for this reason. And then especially when the feature or the cue is permanent, like I like to an extreme version, like in Germany people can like take their swastikas off, right? But you can't do that if the way that a group is marked is like what you look like or the way you talk. I mean, the way you talk is a bit different, but so that also has an effect as well.
Yeah, and I think it's an important distinction and has probably been some, but could do more theorizing, like how other members of your group are going to interact with you versus the out group is going to interact with you. Because
Mm,
Hmm.
um, some of those things, like there's been a lot of proposals that like the fact that we have a really hard time in adulthood, like changing the accents that we are raised with, or the fact that like tattoos much more um, permanently like can be used
Yeah.
as kind of bridge burning devices. Like you tattoo your face, and all of a sudden people know something about you, and will treat you differently because of it. And actually, tattoos, I guess now we can get rid of them, and that's an important tool
mm,
for like dealing with kind of reintegration into society for some members, right, of
right.
Hmm.
gangs. Um, but traits like that are harder to get rid of. Like there's been a lot of speculation, I think, among evolutionary social scientists that this is like a really good way of like committing you to the in-group. But
Hmm.
what's missing in that theorizing is that it's not something that the in-group can control by itself. It actually totally depends on how the out-group's going to perceive you, right?
Right.
It
Mm.
requires that the out-group burns that bridge as well, which is not
Yes.
always it shouldn't be taken for granted. Like we should be thinking
Hmm.
more carefully about like why would the outgroup not be willing to interact with somebody with a certain accent or
Right.
a
Hmm.
face tattoo?
Right.
And I think it's not always
Interesting.
clear.
Yes, that's a really crucial point. There's also this interesting idea that beliefs themselves can be bridge burning tactics. So
Right.
if I voice support for a particular
Yeah.
narrative or myth in my culture, that people in my culture won't think twice about it and they'll find it plausible, but people in other cultures might think that I'm crazy or
Right.
stupid or out of my mind, whatever that itself can be a bridge burning tactic. So really, flagrantly nonsensical conspiracy theory can be a signal of loyalty to the extremist group that I'm a part of, while alienating me from everyone outside of that group. Or if I belong to a
Right.
cult, if I subscribe to this really rococo myth about aliens or abducting me or whatever, that could signal loyalty to that group and alienate me from everyone outside the cult. Do you buy that way of thinking? I'm
I
curious.
do.
Your
No,
Yeah.
I do. I'm laughing because one of our students here at ELA, Ulster, is working on kind of why people have beliefs that the majority of kind of educated elites don't have. And he
Hmm.
uses the example of flat Earth. And he's trying to talk about some other reasons why people might have those beliefs, but I very much think that they can act as bridge burning devices. I still think it's interesting that as
Hmm.
somebody who would be a bit wary of somebody who is espousing flat Earth beliefs, for example, like why wouldn't I want to like buy fruits from them or engage in other
Right.
mutually beneficial
Yeah.
interactions? Like maybe I
Right.
wouldn't want to like learn my geography from them or my geology
Yeah.
from them,
Yeah.
but like why would it inhibit other kind of mutually profitable interactions? um
Interesting.
I think I
Yeah, I have
feel
the
that
intuition that
very
it wouldn't.
yeah.
Like I would
Okay, yeah,
buy,
you would buy their fruits.
I would go to a flat earthers restaurant if if it was highly recommended and had good food. Like, yeah, I don't care what they believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't, get maybe I wouldn't get directions from them. I don't know.
I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't
Yeah,
trust their like
yeah,
GPS
don't go
satellites.
too
Yeah.
far in
I
that
wouldn't.
direction. You'll
Yeah.
drive off the edge of the earth.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
oh,
Yeah.
That's funny. I mean, my
The
intuition
Coco
is that I'd
reference
be
too.
like a
Yeah.
bit
uh-huh.
wary about going to their kitchen.
Oh, really?
But I don't
That's
know, like I
interesting.
don't know why. I don't know why.
Well, I
I
guess what it meant, does it depend on sort of like how their beliefs, like,
It's interesting.
yeah.
I think part of the reason why I would eat at a flat earthers restaurant is because I am a social scientist and I understand the logic of bridge burning tactics, and I know that it's
Mm,
just a bridge burning tactic. It doesn't
Yeah.
actually communicate anything about their intelligence, that they're probably no
hmm.
smarter
Yeah,
or
yeah,
dumber
yeah.
than anyone else. And
Yeah.
so because I know that, I would feel comfortable eating at the restaurant. But I bet the average person does not think that way and might actually judge them as being dumb or crazy.
Oh, I think I'd be hesitant precisely because of the bridge burning. Like I
Oh,
think it is
really?
me co thinking coalitionally, to be honest.
Interesting.
Well, it
It's
depends.
like,
Do they want to
yeah.
bring you into the Flat Earth Society, or are they like spiting you, right? Because if they want to be like, we're appealing, that might be cheaper and better because there's an agenda,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
So sort of, like they're trying to sell you something. And so,
That's true. Like think of Hare Krishna. Like would I eat the Hare Krishna food where they are using the food for proselytizing purposes?
yeah.
I think I
Mm,
haven't, and I'm a little bit wary because I don't want to engage in the proselytizing endeavor, but like I probably would.
Right,
So I don't
right.
know. I'm being inconsistent here.
Yeah.
mm,
I definitely think this is a cool area of research, the ways that they do act as bridge burning and like what it does for what other in-groups think and what other out-groups think and about what, right? I
mhm.
think like the whole categorization and stereotyping literature is, I think like very underspecified about what are those predictions about,
Yes,
because I
yes.
tend not to think very functionally
Right.
and
Mhm.
like bringing it back to materially in the world, what is this going to do for
Yes,
you?
yes.
What is it going to do for your interactions? I think would be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately like what this is another example of like where taking an evolutionary approach is helpful, right? Because it grounds like sort of and Christina, like one of the things I love about your work is that we are taking this thing groups that's so amorphous and trying to sort of create like what is the underlying like what's the bone structure like
Hmm.
is it about coordination, is it about power, and like there's reasons to privilege those kinds of things over like
Hmm.
other categories because of an evolutionary approach, right? Like because these are like things that actually matter to us as
Right.
organisms,
Right. Right.
that
Right.
matter to us as social beings.
Right. Yeah. What are the benefits that we get from being with other people?
Right.
Whereas there are a lot of things, and this speaks to kind of these, what we think of as like implausible beliefs or improbable beliefs, is like a lot of them don't really have any consequences for your day-to-day interaction. And I think that's kind of why it does make sense to think about them as bridge burning because um, it probably isn't going to change your GPS settings, even though we joked
Right.
about it. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that flat earthers and non-flat earthers, round earthers and cone earthers, like all of
Cone
them
Earth, I don't
probably.
know about
No,
this.
no,
Oh,
That's Eli's term. I don't think they exist. And his
Okay.
oh,
argument is like, isn't that interesting that only certain kinds of Earth shapes
Shapes.
exist?
Yeah.
The ones that are like
interesting.
more intuitively
Huh.
realistic is his argument. Um,
Interesting.
and so they could have burned the bridge with the cone earth as well, but they didn't choose that one
Mm,
because it's not as intuitive as his argument.
Right.
Um, but I suspect
interesting.
that in their day-to-day lives, like it doesn't have an effect, right? Do they use different GPS? No. Do they fly on planes? I don't, that's an interesting question. Do they fly on planes?
I think they
Uh,
do, and I think
I think they do.
they,
Yeah.
And
yeah,
does it
and the
change their
fact that the
beliefs?
the fact that the pilot doesn't have to keep steering down, I think, is an argument in favor of the flat Earth. I think that's the argument.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it doesn't really have a practical implication for the life. And that is
Yeah.
interesting, but like it is harder to theorize about why we have beliefs that don't actually affect our everyday material interactions,
Yeah.
except if it has a social purpose, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I find that extremely fascinating as well. To what extent we really believe our beliefs, or whether they're just social signals.
Hmm.
Um, you know, precisely because they don't serve the practical functions that beliefs normally serve of guiding behavior. Of
Yeah,
making sure that I go the right place at the right time. Um,
right.
And
by
it
the way, I
varies
just
too.
quietly looked this up. There's a great documentary about flat earthers called Behind the Curve. I don't know if you guys
Mm.
Oh,
have seen it.
Okay.
I,
It
I,
sounds like it's fodder for puns, though.
oh yeah, a lot of great puns. No, it's a great
Yeah.
doc. It just basically just follows people in a flat Earth society, just interviews them, and you just get a glimpse of what life is like, what these people are like. And I found it really fascinating, and I think it does largely support this idea that the beliefs are social signals.
hmm.
That these people get a sense of community from being part of the flat Earth society. That this is a collection of weirdos, and the flat Earth belief is a way for them to find each other
Hmm.
and demarcate themselves from the rest of society. And it's very much a social thing and not an intellectual thing that was
Yeah,
arrived at intellectually. So I'd recommend that documentary. It's a good watch.
cool.
Anyway,
Yeah, I also like just want to say like, because people, it's easy, especially like scientists, to make fun of flat earthers, but I also feel I feel affection towards them in the following sense of you shouldn't just believe something because people tell you, right? Where would take
Hmm.
issue is they're not typically, I don't want to paint broad strokes, but in my experience, what I've seen is they're not, one remains a flat earther because one doesn't look exhaustively for the evidence for why the earth isn't flat, right? So there's a difference between sort of like not accepting the digested outcome of science, right? Like I personally have an experience that the earth is a globe. that's a fine starting point to be a scientist. That is being a scientist. But then the question is, well, if the Earth is flat versus if the Earth is round, what does that predict? And what is the evidence for one and the other? And there's all kinds of data. We weren't flying spaceships or satellites for a long time, and people knew the Earth was round like for a long time. What data did people use just from like the way the sky looked? Just from the way things like worked on Earth, like seeing a ship go across. So I think I want to just like demarcate that it's sometimes people laugh at flat earthers, but I think like the thing to be laughed at is ignoring evidence as opposed to sort of like holding a belief that's different from what other people believe. I think those are two very different things, and it's important to distinguish between them.
Can I add to that by saying we shouldn't laugh at flat earthers because we're all flat earthers about some things.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I would say like
Yes.
it's and a lot I think of quantum mechanics always as this example of like there's no, like we cannot investigate all of the evidence, right? It's just
Mhm.
impossible. And I do feel like as somebody who's interested in cultural evolution, I think this is one of those places where cultural evolution and evolutionary psychology really have to work together to make sense of like how people process the vast amount of information that is available to them right now.
Yeah.
And like I don't it's really hard and unintuitive for me to imagine that a particle is a wave and a particle like
Yeah.
quantum mechanic phenomena like don't work with my brain
Yeah.
but I would argue with like most people's brain you have to really develop those intuitions
Mhm.
through a lot of hard training
Yeah, and I don't
but
think
they
it is. I
only
don't think they ever do. I think people who,
or they
who
just
they
maintain both.
just sort of like nobody understands it. You just sort of get familiarity with it, but it's not intuitive.
And so, like,
Yeah.
and the reason that I believe that is just because I trust a certain group of people
Yeah.
and not an over
No, that's
another
right.
group of people,
Yeah.
right? So
It's
it's not
interesting.
because I've actually looked through all the, I didn't go and look at like the
Mm.
people who are against quantum mechanics and consider their evidence.
Right.
I didn't. It would just waste all of my time.
Yeah.
So I do think that there
Right.
is a really big challenge right now, or
Yeah.
probably for a lot of human history to deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like what you're saying is that with the flat Earth example, sorry to return to it, the bridge burning is not happening from the side of the bridge that we think it's happening from. So we think of it as the flat earthers are burning the bridge. They're choosing this crazy sounding,
Right.
stupid belief that's going to alienate themselves from the rest of society. But really, once you think about it, the idea that the earth is round is kind of counterintuitive. And
Mhm.
we are the ones who have to take that leap of faith by trusting the experts and trusting the scientific community
We do.
that to believe in this counterintuitive thing. If you think about it, that's really the crazy sounding belief. And we
That's
have
Eli's
already,
argument, but yeah,
yeah, that's
but
Eli's,
I
that's
kind of
interesting.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um,
so maybe we already burned the bridge from our side.
How did the podcast transition into a flatter?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But I think like but you can't I do think that the bridge burning hypothesis for why people believe things as a marker of group identity is a legitimate one. And it just only makes sense if you consider both what's happening within and outside the group. So I'm
Yes.
not like
Right.
it like
Yeah.
bridge burning could be a thing and it requires some sort of understanding of what the outgroup things and so forth. So
It's a
yeah.
culturally constructed bridge. Like
Yeah, something like
everyone
that.
needs to know that the bridge is there and that it's been burned, otherwise it doesn't
Yes.
work.
And how you're going
Right.
to interact with people once it's been, yeah,
Right.
exactly, that
Right.
it's no longer there. Yeah.
So Christina, like your point is that like if somebody sort of like says something outrageous and in one social context nobody cares about it, and in another context it immediately causes people to break up into groups,
Right.
that's the point, is like the same behavior in two different social ecologies.
Right.
One creates coalitional divisions and the other one is just sort of like, well, this is just some person saying something kind of weird.
Yeah. I interact with a
Hmm.
bunch of people who I have disagreements with, and it doesn't
Yeah.
mean um, that I'm no longer their friends or
Mm,
that I
Yeah.
disrespect them in other domains of life. Like it would be impossible to find somebody who totally believes exactly the same things that I do. I
yeah.
guess the point of it being outrageous, I do think is interesting. Like
Hmm.
there's maybe like a bit of a positive feedback loop to go kind of into one extreme corner that's opposite of what somebody else believes. So that maybe is a bit different.
Yeah.
Or like a dynamic that ensues when it is for coalitional purposes. But
Right. This is something John Tooby talked about. I actually started doing an empirical study. I
mm,
never finished it up. I should start it again, or somebody should, where the idea is sort of like really outrageous ideas versus normal ideas. The outrageous ideas are much more diagnostic
mhm.
of a social interaction. It's kind of like the language principle, right? Like
Mm,
if you see two people or you hear two people and they speak similar languages, the inference is just like at some level, there's been a concatenated series of like events where like these two people share a fuzzy set of like um, social interactions, right? Like it's impossible that they speak
mhm.
similarly and grew up without growing up in like sort of this fuzzy set of like
Right.
common people. And if you like show up and like some two people say, well, it's raining outside versus like, I believe God is like a purple-headed elephant, the purple-headed elephant, like that's really low prior, right? That like
Right.
anybody's even going to think that. So it's really much more diagnostic. Like at some
Yeah.
point, these two had a weird conversation and for whatever reason agreed on it.
Yeah.
Versus,
Mhm.
you could just arrive at it's raining because you're looking outside and it's raining. It's not predictive. And so like John Tooby's point was sort of maybe sometimes, and Christina, this sounds like what you were saying too, is like the weirdness of the content is actually serving this function. It's not always
Right.
the
Right.
right thing to do, but it might be. It's sort of more clearly. It's such a low probability thing,
Right.
unless it was arrived at by people all getting together and sort of agreeing on it.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. And otherwise, it'd just be like a single crazy person.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that is something I'm kind of working on now. Sorry, not to make
Oh,
this about
cool.
myself, but
No,
it's like some
this is about you.
um
Please. No, no, no.
no, it's about
Come
the
on, Christina.
field.
You should be asking us.
No, but it
How
is
dare
like
you?
it is precisely like how we arrive at common understandings of what a lot of people would think of originally as a crazy belief, that it's kind of
Mm.
motivating me to look at the origin of a pilgrimage site in the Peruvian Altiplano. And
Oh, cool.
that's kind of exactly the yeah, the contrast I make is like so people started celebrating like the fact that Jesus Christ appeared on the side of a mountain in 2014. And so then I've been trying to map on like through time like who's adopting that belief, who's going to this pilgrimage, who doesn't believe it. And the important connection here is just that um the first person who saw Jesus's face on the side of the mountain and thought it was worth celebrating, um, it is a low prior. People should have a low prior on that. And so they could have just been dismissed as a crazy person. So then how do they go about creating a set of people who all agree?
Yeah.
And I don't think that it was that concerted of an effort of one person trying to create that community, although some individuals might have been more involved than others. But yeah, the first person who said this is a flat Earth, that the Earth is
Yeah.
flat, like I don't know the history of it. Maybe we do have
Interesting.
enough records, but they somehow managed to not just be a crazy person, perceived as a crazy person
Yeah.
by the
Yeah.
society, but actually build a community around it.
Right. It's like the
Could I mean,
origins of religion, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I mean, so a working hypothesis I have about this is that in order to trust someone's testimony, you have to assume that they have your best interests at heart and they're not trying to manipulate
Hmm.
you or
Hmm.
exploit you. So you have to be sort of loyal and trusting to the person
Right.
to trust what they have to say about any topic, whether it's flat Earth or Jesus being born of a virgin or whatever. And so it could be that maybe the first person who started flat Earthism, maybe this was like a really high status, charismatic, beloved person, and people wanted to basically signal their loyalty to this person by trusting this person's
Hmm.
opinion and not calling them crazy. And maybe that was diagnostic to the person of these people believe me, these people don't. These people are my friends, they're with me, they're on my
Hmm.
side, they trust me. These people don't. And so belief itself can become a cue of
Hmm.
loyalty and trust to a group, and that might be the origin of where these crazy beliefs
Right.
come from, is it's precisely because they're hard to believe that they're good signals of
Right.
loyalty and trust.
mm,
Yeah, so that would be like a different process. Like by one dynamic, like you have the kind of extreme belief to begin with.
Hmm.
By another one, like they become more. Another possibility is that they become more extreme. Like you start off with somebody who just asks you to believe that, um, to question whether we have good evidence that the Earth is round, let's say, and then like it becomes more extreme. So I don't know the history of this one. I think that in some ways, what our results are suggesting in this particular case is that another pathway is like for it not to try to work with the perception of the extremity of the content itself to begin with. So I agree with you. We do have evidence that people are more likely to go to the site if they first learned about it from somebody that they trusted, like a close family
Mm,
member or friend, right? So that
okay.
that increases their belief. That's not, we're not, we actually can't actually find the person. Everybody says that there was a first person who saw this, and that everybody
Mm.
agrees that it was a minor. And then beyond that, we have not been able to find the first person, and we have not been able, like, they have very different beliefs. Like, some of them say he's dead, some of them say he's in jail. Like, it's so we have not been able to track that down. But we are able to see that, in fact, like, consistent with your prediction, David, like, you are more likely to believe this, you are more likely to go if you have trustworthy sources, and
Mm,
other people tell you that miracle has been granted there, because it does require that kind of faith. However, another thing that seems to be happening, which is quite different than from the flat earth, possibly, is that it's trying to piggyback on belief systems that already exist, right? And so
Mm.
making it feel less unfamiliar. So I if
mm,
it and that is an inherent tension, right? Like,
yeah.
of like whether a belief system acts for bridge burning purposes, or if it's trying to bring everybody in along for the ride and say, like,
Mm,
no, 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 this is actually quite similar to that other pilgrimage site that you've been going to for several years, right?
mm,
So I think belief change can work in different ways. And this kind of goes back to the question of, like, what counts as like a crazy belief. And, Dave, your point that you're affectionate towards flat earthers, like, yeah, because there are, like, some beliefs that are crazy that we just accept,
Yeah.
and some
right.
beliefs that are crazy that are probably wrong, but, like, we don't really think people are crazy for having them. So,
Yeah.
um,
It's like almost like what you're saying is you need a backdrop of cultural similarity in order to get a cultural difference. That in order to have a bridge burning tactic where one belief is considered crazy by one side and sane by the other side, is there needs to be a common cultural understanding of what counts as crazy and what
right,
counts as not crazy.
right,
Without that common cultural understanding, the mechanism wouldn't work.
Mm.
right. So
Um,
and then the cultural background can be used either to create something that's going to be understood as crazy, or like, or bridge burning, crazy enough
mhm,
that you're burning some bridges, or a cultural background can be used to inform how to make it not sound crazy. So
mhm,
both of those
yeah,
can produce change, right?
right.
There's sort of a trope too of like, and I mean, it always seems to be like, like if you watch like a Bigfoot documentary or like spiritualism, and maybe this is just wrong, but maybe it's just like people with lots of disposable income have the time to do this. But people who are like looking for the Loch Ness monster, like when I was a kid, I
Hmm.
love Loch Ness monster books, or like those kinds of things. Um, there's this sort of thing of like conspiratorial or sort of wacky beliefs, and this is me taking off my scientist hat and just like my personal observation is it almost looks kind of entrepreneurial in the sense of like people with status and resources are more willing to sort of say wacky things.
Hmm.
um, and again, that might be wrong, and it might just be that like those are the people who
Hmm.
can afford to like buy the
Right.
boat and the sonar looking for the Loch Ness monster, and the guy who like is too poor to do any of that, there's no documentary about him, he just thinks it's true. But yeah, is that a thing where like sort of
Hmm.
can this be used entrepreneurially to sort of people are generating, if you find yourself in a high bargaining phenotype or context, you're sort of spouting sort of things that are, like you said, like within this range of sort of like maybe some people will come along with me and maybe they won't. It's almost like a leadership or a grouping entrepreneurial thing. Is that crazy?
That seems possible. It's consistent with, well, I was thinking of the early adopter literature, which is usually not about coming up with like a new belief, but coming, like, being an early adopter of a new technology is where that's been
Mm,
studied a lot. And um, some people might be seen as crazy for adopting a new technology, right? But it is overwhelmingly, that literature suggests, kind of higher status individuals who are um, the ones doing the early adoption. But then that could be like a very kind of minimal not so strategic explanation for it could just be that they can, like you hinted at, right, that they could
Yeah.
afford to do that. They can afford to lose some reputational status points if it turns out to be a bad choice.
Right.
Um,
Or just can about they can afford like the monetary risk,
the
right? Of
mon
just
even
like,
just the
yeah,
monetary
yeah,
risk.
exactly.
But also if but I think it is an interesting alternative that like all the people who did do this kind of early adoption that didn't get followers and it didn't pay off like that, we just don't see them in the literature.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you
Yes.
were hinting at something a bit more strategic, right? That like there is a way that people are doing this when they want to create some sort of grouping.
Right. I also I want sometimes wonder like in the context of like science being a status game that, science sort of works this way too, where like certain people are just sort of motivated to be like, what I'm doing is different, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You do get rewarded for being different,
Yeah.
But
having new
yeah, but
ideas.
I think you have, but to your point, Dave, I think you have to have a certain level of status to even get away with,
Right.
going out on a limb and saying crazy things, right? People have to be willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, in order for it to pay off. So yeah, I buy that way of thinking. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that cult leaders are often very charismatic people. It's because they have to earn that status and loyalty before they can
Right.
whip out their crazy beliefs.
Yeah.
What is charisma then, though? Like, I kind of wonder. I mean, we know like people have been
Yeah,
talking about it since the early 20th century, but some people that are currently like obviously very charismatic, I have a hard time understanding why. Do we
yeah.
have like good operational definitions of that? Because like if we think of it as just like high SES, like they actually have the material backing. I don't, is that also true of cult leaders that they have like the material wealth to become cult leaders? Or is it like these more intangible
I
things
think
that,
it's more into, I mean, there's
yeah.
so little high quality work on charisma. I've been thinking about it a bit myself, actually.
Hmm.
I think it's a kind of social intelligence. So, I have a paper called "The Evolution of Social Paradoxes." I'm trying to
Mm,
get published now, and it's about how a lot of our signals have to be concealed in order to be successfully transmitted.
mhm.
So we have to compete for status without revealing the fact that we're competing for status. Because if we're outed as a status seeker, we actually, lose status.
Yeah.
Or, we try to get other people's attention without being an attention seeker. Or we try to be brave and defy social norms in order to win the approval and esteem of our peers. And there are a lot of these kinds of paradoxical signals that we send, where the when the signal itself is revealed, it collapses and you fail to gain any of the benefits. If you're seen as a virtue signaler, you're not going to get virtue. In order to get virtue, you have to be seen as authentically caring about helping or doing good. And if you're just trying to boost your reputation as a morally superior person, then you're going to look morally inferior. And so I think what charisma is the ability to send these kinds of concealed signals. So a charismatic person is a person that can successfully virtue signal without revealing the fact that they're virtue signaling. They're a person who can display their status without displaying the fact that they're displaying their status. They can capture others' attention without outing themselves as an
Mm,
attention seeker. They're exceptionally good at playing these kinds of social games that require lots of levels of recursive mentalizing
mm,
about knowing what the other person knows you know, and knowing that they're not going to know that you intentionally wanted them to know that.
yeah.
That's my working model of what charisma is. It's a kind of ability to play social games really well,
Yeah.
while concealing the fact that you're playing those games. And that itself becomes a cue of your likely status in the future. Because if you're socially attractive, and I find myself, you're sort of emitting all of the cues that I'm looking for in a good social partner. Well, that suggests to me that, other people are going to respond the same way, and you're likely to win a
Mm,
lot of followers and a lot of friends, and you're likely to ascend the status hierarchy, even if you're not high status right now. And so I think that's what charisma is about. Sorry, I'm just
no,
sort
that's
of spewing
interesting.
my thinking on this topic.
I like
But
that
yeah, I'm
you're,
curious if you think that's plausible or not.
yeah, I like that you're kind of getting to a more operational definition of it. And I know
Hmm.
that there are like game theoretic models about that,
Yeah.
about like burying signals, right?
Hmm.
That I think also boggle my mind a little bit in terms of you have, yeah, being, I don't know how they're stable to like higher order thinking, but I think they are. I think they are. I don't know the
Yeah.
literature well enough. Um,
Yeah.
They're like how to be just subtle enough
Yeah,
while
no,
still
I
having
mean,
the same motivation and having that
right.
work is kind of
I'm
amazing.
My thinking about why it's stable is that the ability to send deceptive signals effectively is itself a valid cue of your likely social status.
Right. But then that's true for, so those kinds of like positive feedback loops, they could be for
Hmm.
anything, right? Like if
Yeah.
kind of that's what sexual selection models do, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you want somebody tall? Oh, because other people want somebody tall. And so like,
Yeah.
that could stabilize anything, right? So I like
Yeah.
this idea that it's about like specifically these kinds of games
Hmm.
being played where you cannot be too overt about what you want. But I don't know. Some people right now, I don't want to name names, but like some people right now seem quite overt about their motivations and still seem to be quite charismatic.
That is true, but only certain motivations.
Yeah,
So,
interesting.
he's definitely overtly braggadocious and overtly narcissistic. But I think what ultimately he's signaling is a kind of loyalty to his base and an enmity toward their enemies.
Yeah,
And I think he's signaling that effectively
yeah,
because he's using bridge burning tactics, as
yeah,
we've been discussing. He's saying things that are outrageous to the left wing intelligentsia, and it's precisely because they're so outrageous to the left wing intelligentsia that it wins him approval from
yeah,
his base.
yeah, I
So I
think
think
so.
that's really what he's signaling,
Yeah.
and I think he's doing it effectively.
Hmm.
Whether he's concealing that signal, I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Doesn't seem like it. I don't
And
know.
yeah,
Anyway,
in a different
yeah.
direction, I've always thought like, I don't know, has anybody done the evolutionary psychology of cool of being cool?
Is cool different than charismatic? I think
I
so,
don't
right?
know. I don't know. I mean, because I think I mean
I th
I take a slightly different take. Well, David, what do you
yeah,
think?
I view them as largely synonymous.
Yeah, I think I mean I think cool. I think there's like people that just are sort of wired because like even like kids. So like my son, for example, is much more charismatic than me. And when he walks into a room, like
Don't be
people
so
in
harsh on yourself. He's
no, well, no, but
much,
no, it's
it's an
actually no,
age
but he
thing.
is like he's just very charismatic. And I'm not the only person to like observe this, and
That's
like
funny.
there's just something about the way he's wired that like people enjoy being around him, and he like the room is different when he's in it and not. And I see that, I've had enough experiences like where, whatever parents are biased, but like so even if it's not true, like I still think this can be true even like of kids. And so I think the value of sort of like that this person is wired to make people feel good. I think the things David's talking about will come along, right? Or
Mm,
or like that skill set or whatever that is, then kind of naturally leads into this strategic use for good or bad or neutral. That's just because people are people. But I think, but yeah, I was just wondering if anybody's sort of done the evolutionary psychology of cool.
That would be cool.
It
I
would
don't
be.
think so. Not to my knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I think I feel like coolness is like part charisma and part just like status in general. That like you can be a non-charismatic cool person if you're just really well respected and high status,
that's
you know?
true. That's definitely true.
Like I could be a
Um,
really awkward
yeah,
person,
yeah,
and yet if I am widely regarded as a genius, I could still be cool, you know?
right.
I think this might be a conversation where it might be again like useful to think
Yeah.
about like functioning, what do you do with that information or with that like leverage that now you have? And
Yeah.
or like what are the people who are assessing you as cool do with that, right?
Yeah,
Is it that they're going to
Hmm.
learn from you? Is it that they want to
right.
become part of your coalition?
Yeah,
Is it
Hmm.
that you have like insider information? Because I had kind of had the sense that cool would also be somebody who's kind of up on trends so that they would be like an early
Hmm.
adopter. Is that not
right.
true? Like if you're,
I
can
think
you
you're
be,
right that it's a placeholder for lots of different. I think there's ambiguity about what it refers to. Yeah, and I suspect it's
Right.
yeah.
Well, picking up on social trends and, conforming to the latest trends without revealing the fact that you're a conformist, that is
Mhm.
itself the same skill that produces charisma, I think. So I think being
Right, right.
fashionable and trendy and being charismatic are largely synonymous, and they stem from the same underlying ability.
Yeah. Yeah, but I
Uh,
think I think is it worth like thinking about each of those kinds of things that you want to signal without being overt? Like that you're trying to signal that you're have inside information without conforming seems kind of different from you are trying to show that you're very morally righteous without showing that you're morally righteous, right? Like
Mhm.
at least it's
Yeah.
different content. I don't know if it's going to be functionally then used for different
It,
purposes, but
definitely different content, but I think the level of recursive mind reading is the
mm,
same in both cases, and that you
mm,
have to descend a few layers of recursive mind reading to so that I can know that you don't know that I want you to know X, right? Or I anticipate that you're going to be anticipating that I'm going to try to make you think X, and therefore I'm going to do Y instead so that you don't think that I wanted you to think X. Sorry, that got very complicated,
I'm
but
stuck at two
that's
levels. Like I don't do recursive reasoning. I'm stuck
That's
at
well,
great.
it's precisely that ability that is that
that's why I'm
does
not
not.
Yeah.
charismatic.
Well, we do know
Yeah.
the systems in their natural format. Yeah, no, exactly. Christina, to make sure we get to, there's a couple of things. One is like, how did you discover evolutionary social science? Like, how did you get
Jeez.
interested in it?
Gosh, I think maybe a lot of us are contrarians, and so maybe it's not going to work so well for the next generation because I think we're more established now. But I do remember being a history major and then taking my intro bioanthro class from Jonathan Marks. And he is a well-respected biological anthropologist, but who really likes to point towards the kind of its sordid history and all
Mm,
the ways that it's misused.
Mm.
And and kind of not propping up some of like the interesting triumphs of like evolutionary approaches to human to understanding humans, not just behavior. And so I think that really hooked me, to be honest. Just not the sordid history, but like the search for like what is good about this and like what can we do about this. Um, and so
So,
that's when I
so
switched to anthro.
can you clarify so that the class was saying like there's a sordid history, but there were like there's a core. Can you just flesh that out? Sorry, I just missed
I
that.
kind
Yeah.
of I'd have to like reconstruct what his complaints were, but
Or wait, was he complaining about biological anthropology? And you're like,
yes.
that sounds good.
Yeah, and I was like, that
Oh,
sounds
I
good.
see.
Yes, yes, yes.
Ah,
That's why
that's
I
the
think I'm a bit of a
contrarian part.
contrarian. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Cool.
he was like, biological anthropology, these are all of the bad things about it. And I'm like, oh, but there
Yeah.
must be something good here. There must be something useful here. And I think at the time, like, we're also, I do think about this with our current students. Like, I think they're often like, I mean, myself at the time, probably also like drawn to issues that seem like, um, politically like contentious, and at the
Right.
time I think it was maybe a bit more so,
Right.
and so I think that's less so now. I think most people believe and understand like how evolution is important to understanding humans, but maybe disagree about exactly how.
Yeah.
um and so just the fact that there was like a controversy there, I think drew
Yeah.
me to it and like wanted to dig more. So I did change to being an anthro major, and then I just started picking and choosing classes that seemed to speak to also this possibility of having like a big kind of holistic understanding of all of the things about why we are the way we are. Um, and I think it's not surprising that it's often a somewhat, it doesn't have to be, but it tends to draw kind of secular people, maybe
Mm.
as a kind of replacement for like a framework for
Yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
kind of pretty puzzling things about humans and our relatives. And I suspect it does some sort of
Yeah.
replacement, even if it works differently for.
And that was a big part of Dave's origin story back when I
Yeah.
interviewed him. You mentioned your religious
Yeah.
upbringing, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
That was a 2 hour episode.
I'll have to listen to that then.
Yeah. Episode 2 coming
yeah.
soon or
Okay.
out already by the time people are hearing this. So
Yeah.
go back. Yeah. Christina, is there anything that we should have asked you?
Oh man, I didn't prepare for that.
No, we didn't. Well, we haven't. This is not yet
Pretty
public, so
much everyone
nobody.
is completely taken
Yeah,
off guard by that
and then
question
we
when they
just have
say.
a couple 30 seconds of filler banter, and then but no,
Oh,
we this is a surprise because we're not actually published yet
We
when we've
should
been recording this.
but we
So.
should discuss. I don't have an answer to it, but we should discuss about like what are the next steps or like the big things that evolutionary social sciences has to do,
Yeah,
potentially.
yeah.
yeah,
And I do,
we
but
should have
yeah.
you back on
No, no, no,
for
no.
that.
That would
Somebody
be
else has better
awesome.
No, no,
ideas.
no, no, no,
No,
no.
that would be an awesome episode. Yeah, the
Yeah.
future of evolutionary social science with Christina Moya. Well,
I don't have a
to
good
be continued on
answer.
that one.
We have
I
a
Yeah.
also
bunch of
have
good t-shirts for this episode, I think. What was it? Essence of Dog and
Essence of
uh,
Dog, yeah.
Essence of Dog and
Flat Earther
restaurant.
restaurant, yeah.
Somebody get on
that
that.
was a good
I
one.
figured it'd be like a hot dog place. That's sort of what I was imagining. I don't know what you guys were imagining.
Like I thought more like quesadillas.
Oh, that would be more fitting.
Oh,
That
wait,
okay,
let's
you
see.
you
There you
won.
go.
You won that competition.
That's sorry, Christina, you were about to say
Oh
something
no,
before.
something else. I guess like I don't have another thing I don't have a good answer for, but I want somebody else. Maybe you guys should interview somebody else who tells us about kind of evolutionary approaches in the real world and like what they can
Mm,
give us other because
yeah.
I very much come to this from a basic science perspective and I'm just motivated by curiosity.
Yeah.
Um, and I sometimes think that's not enough or like that we could do more. And I feel guilty sometimes about just being motivated by curiosity. And so just to, particularly in this moment where like science and understanding the world and cross-cultural diversity, I think is not particularly valued. Um, I think we'd have to kind of work on our argument for that. So I think you
Yeah.
should cut it because I don't have the argument
Yeah.
ready, but I think we
No.
should discuss it
Yeah. No,
or
no
figure out
problem.
a good answer.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, we've had so like we had Michael Moncrief on, and he does like work on like terrorism, international
Mm,
humanitarian law.
right.
But yeah, but where these things sort of get cashed out into policy, though I know, and David is a good critic of this, of the long history in social sciences of sort of taking a half-baked or maybe
Yeah,
completely raw idea, foisting it on people and having,
right.
the road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of
Totally.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think that is there's a book called Applied Evolutionary Anthropology. I don't know if you've, David
Mm.
Lawson
No.
is your colleague,
Oh,
actually,
it's
is
David.
an editor,
Oh,
a
great. Well,
co-editor.
we'll
Yet
have
another
David on.
David.
We'll have, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that'll be
yeah. It won't
great.
get
Yeah.
confusing at all. Um, but I think some of the case studies that they highlight are ones where actually it was just kind of like putting the brakes on kind of strong hypotheses that like development econ people had, right?
Right.
Just
Mm,
by being ethnographically informed and thinking like
Yeah.
just having a broader set, like the evolutionary framework giving you like a broader set of like possible predictions of the ways that things could turn out.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like that's paralyzing, right? Or at least for me, I'm like, I don't know where to go from here,
Yeah.
but it is important to have those cautions. But I think I'm just overly cautious, and then somebody's going to make those policies anyway,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And
Exactly.
so then
Yeah.
the question
Yeah.
is, how do we speak to that?
Yeah, and
Um,
there's so much documented. Like I was just looking at like the Afghanistan papers book, like just for as an example for in Psych One, just
okay,
sort of like conformity, because like what's the newest
yeah,
decade, what's in the last 2 decades, and there's all this evidence, like tons of people on the ground, the war in Afghanistan, there were just tons of people on the ground who would be like criticizing or concerned with like what are we doing in this particular
hmm
case, like or now that we're here, which was fine, why aren't we leaving now? And this was
hmm
across parties, across area, like this was just like people who knew the situation.
yeah,
um, and so there's tons of examples, like that's just one of, it's not like people are splitting hairs often, and it's sort of like, well, is this good or not? It's often a thing of like the people at the top don't want to hear it,
right,
or the people at the top, their life and death, quote unquote, is sort of like independent of what's the reality, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't want to look soft to my constituents. It doesn't really
right,
matter what's happening on the ground.
right,
So I think like, I think this is where like having anthropologists on the ground, or like keeping open, transparent information of like, if we do implement this policy, what is the consequence, and keeping a conversation with the people affected. It's obvious to say, but it's shocking how infrequently that actually like
hmm,
happens.
yeah. And I mean, you're pointing to more intractable problems at that point.
Sure. No, no, no. But I
Yeah,
think it's just an example of like, I think at every level, like
yeah.
even, I think this just happens, right?
yeah.
I took a note. I'm going to send a message to you, but that's for David as you were talking about your charisma paper. Do you know
Yes, no, I love that. I love
Oh,
that
okay,
stuff. Yeah,
okay.
no, yeah, the buried signal. Yeah, Moshe
Yeah, yeah.
Hoffman, and they
Yeah,
do
yeah.
excellent stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
I
just
couldn't help but thinking about those
for
models. Yeah.
those who so Christina just sent a chat in the Zoom thing about a very cool paper by Moshe Hoffman and Erez Yoeli about the game theory of buried signaling.
Hmm.
And they do also they have a book called Hidden Games that reviews their research, which is wonderful and highly recommended.
I didn't know we were still on the air. I thought we were doing the bantering thing.
No,
We're
this
still
is
we're
we're
still
still
recording.
recording. So swear all
But
you want. I don't. Um,
anyways, thank
yeah,
you so much, Christina. I really love this conversation. I love that we just got to bounce ideas off each other. That's the best kind of fun
Yeah,
conversation to have. So thank you so much
it was
for
super fun. Yeah.
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 And
So
lots of
yeah,
food for thought.
Yep.
absolutely,
Thank you.
including from the Flat Earth restaurant.
Yep.
Somebody's going to start that.
Well, you've wasted another hour to two with David, myself, and most likely a guest, unless this was one where it's just David and I.
Yeah. Chances are there was a guest.
Yeah.
But if you enjoyed it,
We're just randomly attaching outros to the to these
yeah, we
episodes.
don't know which episode this is going to be
Yeah, we
attached
have
to.
no idea. Yeah.
So maybe there was a guest, maybe there wasn't.
Yeah.
But in any case, if you enjoyed what you just listened to, please leave us a kind review. Check out our Patreon page. Do what you can to support us because, we depend on your support to keep doing this.
Yeah. And please just spread the word. Let people know if you're enjoying this podcast. If everybody who's listening just told one other person, then we would, I don't know, let me do the math. That would what, double our listenership?
I think that checks out.
And then the next generation, oh, it's like exponential, right?
Yeah, so maybe we could take over the world
Oh,
if all of you tell someone about our podcast.
I don't know if this is like a reproduction or differential reproductive success and natural selection or a pyramid scheme or why choose?
Yep, all of the above.
Okay. We'll see you guys next week. And David, I'll see you in a little bit.
Sounds good.
Okay.